Good afternoon. Today we are going to talk about values. And as we've been discussing, and understanding yourself is an important foundation before you can lead others. Your strength and core values are two major parts of who you are. Almost every organization, individual, religious group, and government organization has values. They post them proudly on their website or in their manager's office. Marketers spend billions trying to understand what we value. And things around us, such as our friends, schools, churches, shape what we value. And businesses try to create products that align with what we value. But so what? Why do we value values? What are some values? Before we go on, values is one of those buzzwords. So who can give me some examples? Cool. So something like caring, integrity, commitment. Now we're going to have a group discussion. So talk about this with the few people around you. Why do businesses have values? Who influences them? And how does where you grow up influence your values? And how have you seen that before? Do they actually make a difference with how we behave? So, values versus vision. We have a lot of reasons why values matter. So, today we're going to try and identify those values that are important to each of us and dig deeper into those values that impact our lives. First, it is important to identify your core values. You might make a list of values and think, well, I value a lot of those things, but it is important to narrow down the list and understand which of those values you're going to use to direct your life. This process is very personal. Now, everyone received 5 pieces of paper when they walked in today. On each piece, write one value. And don't just write a word, but write what the value means to you. Okay, so look at the 5 values in front of you. I want you to hold them tight and think of those as your anchors, but the things that you will use as a lens with which you will see the world. These pillars with which will keep everything else in your world upright. Now, I would like you to throw away 2 of those values. I want you to think about the 3 values that you have in your hand. Why did you choose these precious 3? I want you to hold them tight and think of these as your anchors. The things that you will use as a lens which you will see the world. These pillars with which will keep everything else in your world upright. Now, I want you to throw one of them away. I want you to think about the 2 values that you still have in your hand. Why did you choose to keep these 2? I want you to hold them tight. Think of these things as your anchors. The things that you will use as the lens which you will see through the world. These pillars with which keep everything else in your world upright. Okay, everyone take a few minutes, and we are going to brain dump. So, what are you feeling? How did you decide what values to throw away? How did it feel to throw away the other values? What value did you keep and why? So I want you to discuss this in groups of 4. And when you think about these questions, I want you to kind of dig deeper when you think of these 4 questions. So when I said, what are you feeling? Think of like, why are you feeling that way? Or why is it so emotional? And the other question that I asked you, how did you decide what values to throw away? What made the other ones less important? What made the other ones that you decided to keep more important than the other ones? And also, how did it feel to throw away the other values? Here's a question for you. How often do we throw away our values on a Saturday night? When we're in a hurry, or when we have something more immediate that we want? What if every time we threw away one of our values, we were as aware as we are right now of what we are doing? Do you think our behavior would change? And lastly, what values did you keep and why? Think of also, to dig deeper, what influenced you choosing this value? Have you ever unintentionally thrown away a value in your daily life? And what if we were pained by throwing away our values away in real life as we were about throwing away these pieces of paper? In a minute, we are going to let you rewrite your values and not take them away from you. But before we do so, why is it important to actually define and write down our values? Like I kind of mentioned earlier, it's important to hold yourself accountable. If you say that you really believe in something and someone tries to make you do something against your values, you need to hold yourself accountable and make sure that you stick to your values because it's what you believe is best for you and not be pressured by something else. So defining our values gives us purpose. When you don't know or you haven't clearly defined your values, you end up drifting along life. Instead of basing your decisions on an internal compass, you make choices on circumstances and social pressures. Kind of like what I just mentioned. You kind of get pressured to do things and you end up living other people's core values instead of your own and staying true to yourself. Trying to be someone else and living without core values is downright exhausting and it leaves you feeling empty and shiftless. Instead, living life in line with your core values brings purpose, direction, happiness, and wholeness. For example, your parents might value financial rewards or security, which has led you to a high major return, but that might not be something you value most. And also, defining our values gives us confidence and accountability, which is what I've been mentioning. I've noticed that when I take the time to really think and meditate upon what I value and then write those things down, I'm more likely to have courage and confidence to make those choices based on those values. There's something about actually writing down your values that makes you more committed to living them. So, for example, I decided that I wanted to run a marathon, but I was nervous about actually doing it. So what did I do? I posted to Facebook and Twitter and told everyone, and I'm going to run a marathon. That's what I said. And once you put something out there, into the world, our tendency to follow through with it is much higher. So again, with accountability. And then third, values make life simpler. Does this align with my values in making a choice? Defining our values makes life much simpler. And when you're sure of your core values, decision making becomes much simpler. So when you're faced with a choice, you simply ask yourself, does this align with my values? If it does, you do it. And if it doesn't, then you don't do it. Instead of fretting over what's the best thing to do and standing shilly-shally in a time of crisis, you simply let your internal compass guide you. Values must be our anchors and drive and direct our actions. Essentially, our values anchor us throughout our fast-paced roller coaster of a life, and values should be the same driving force behind these actions we take and the decisions that we make. And core values in leadership. So, beyond the self-awareness that comes from knowing your values, it is very important that a leader is not only aware of his or her values, but actively lives in them. So if values were just words, then they are worthless. So when there's a gap between what people say and what people do, then what happens? You lose trust, they lose influence, and they lose morale. So example is that you could think when there isn't feedback. So what happens if a person says their in timeliness is important to them, but they're always late? They say they really value family, but would rather be on Facebook than talking to their family. What if someone said that they value helping others in service, but they're constantly putting themselves first? So our ability to build strong teams where there's trust, have influence over others, and create a strong team morale is contingent upon our consistency and living out with what we say. So it is sometimes easy to point out values discrepancies in celebrities and athletes. But a wise man once said, if you know what you value really by how you spend your money and time. So let's turn back to the list that we made at the beginning of class. Do the 5 things that you wrote down on the pieces of paper align with how you are currently spending your time and money? If not, as we move on to the next section in drafting values, think about that. Are my values off, or should I change something? Some things my schedule and budget. And we are now going to give everyone a few minutes to write out their values. As we heard earlier, different people define values. And so don't just write down a word like, oh, love a family, but define what that means to you. So something like integrity. So I hold myself to that. So I would explain like what that means to me and not just put that word. I would encourage you to keep them to 3 to 5. The more you have, the harder it will be to leverage them in all the decision making. And to wrap it up, the bottom line that I want you to take from this is values matter. So focus on your values and live them. So know what you value, define them, and live by them. So the emotions you felt when you threw away a value should be the same every time you put something else in front of your core values. So saying your values out loud could help keeps you accountable, also helps you focus on them. So values make life much simpler. So do yourself a favor and post your values somewhere. They can be truly leveraged. Thank you.